What if I told you there's a village on the British mainland where the nearest road is a 7-mile hike through mountains? The pub holds a Guinness World Record for remoteness, and the entire community pooled their money to buy it themselves just to keep it alive. Or that an island in Shetland, home to about 30 people, still celebrates Christmas on the 6th of January because they never bothered switching to the modern calendar. This video covers the 15 loneliest inhabited places in the United Kingdom, and none of them are ghost towns or abandoned ruins. People still wake up here every morning, still raise families, still go about their lives, just without most of what the rest of us take for granted. Every single entry on this list carries at least one detail that makes you stop and think, wait, that actually happens in Britain. We rank these from number 15 down to number 1 based on remoteness, population size, access to services, and how difficult they are to reach. And number 1 is a place so cut off that mail still arrives by mule, and the only way in or out is on foot or by helicopter. That one alone is worth staying for. Subscribe to our channel so the algorithm doesn't mislead you. We're starting with the England. Number 15. Flash, Staffordshire, England. England's highest village opens this list. Flash sits at 1,519 feet above sea level in the Staffordshire moorlands, perched on the southern slope of Axe Edge Moor, about 4 miles southwest of Buxton. Right at 3 shire heads, Staffordshire, Derbyshire, and Cheshire, all converge at an ancient packhorse bridge, and the Ordnance Survey confirmed Flash as England's highest village in a 2019 survey. 242 residents appeared in the 2011 census for the civil parish, but the village proper amounts to a small cluster of cottages, farms, and a church. Altitude drives the loneliness here, not size. At over 460 meters, winters hammer this place with snow that regularly cuts off access, while fierce winds and thick mist sweep across wild gritstone moorland in every direction. No bus service runs through Flash. The village school shut down when attendance dropped to just 4 pupils, and in 1981 it reportedly stood as the only village in England without mains water. And that's where the story turns strange, because Flash earned its real fame through crime. The term flash money, meaning counterfeit coins, reportedly originated in this village where locals repurposed button-making tools for coin forging. Criminals worked the 3-county border at 3 shire heads to their advantage, and whenever police from one county closed in, operations simply shifted across the line into the next jurisdiction. A servant girl eventually exposed the ring, which led to arrests and hangings at Chester. Today, the village claims England's highest shop, Flash bar stores, and England's highest village pub, the New Inn, while 5 rivers rise in the surrounding landscape. Wind-battered and beautiful, Flash doesn't collapse or decay. It just occupies its own world, high enough and cold enough and far enough from anything that most people never think to check on it. Number 14. Nenthead, Cumbria, England. North into the North Pennines, another high-altitude settlement, carries a history that puts most British villages to shame. Nenthead occupies ground at about 1,437 feet in Cumbria, 4 miles east of Alston, surrounded by some of the emptiest landscape in England. What sets Nenthead apart is its origin as one of Britain's earliest purpose-built industrial model villages, laid out from 1825 by the Quaker-owned London Lead Company. Housing came with the job, and so did a school that mandated education for both boys and girls at a time when that bordered on radical. A reading room, public baths, and a wash house rounded out the plan, and Nenthead claims it operated the first free lending library in the UK, alongside electric street lighting powered by surplus mine electricity. Roughly 2,000 people packed the village at its peak around 1861, and the broader parish topped nearly 7,000 back in 1831. Lead prices then cratered. The London Lead Company pulled out in 1882, a Belgian outfit mined zinc until 1949, and the mines sealed shut for good in 1961. Parish population today hovers around 2,000, with Nenthead itself reduced to a fraction of its former self, and an estimated 32% of current residents living in retirement. Climate adds another layer of difficulty, with an average annual temperature of just 6.5 degrees Celsius and over 1,000 millimeters of precipitation, much of it landing as heavy snow. Nenthead once operated at the cutting edge of industrial community planning, and now it endures quietly at the top of England with a pub called the Miners' Arms, a community shop housed in the old reading room, and a bus route that recently cost over £2,000 a year to subsidize. A Canadian mining company drilled 500-meter boreholes here in 2013, convinced that huge zinc deposits still sit beneath the village, which means the resources that built Nenthead might outlast the community living above them. Number 13. New Quay, Ceredigion, Wales. On the surface, nothing about New Quay screams lonely. Say Newwood perches on Cardigan Bay in Ceredigion, about 19 miles southwest of Aberystwyth, and it's just over 1,000 residents according to the 2021 census share a harbor, pubs, a GP surgery, a primary school, and a post office. Looks like a functioning town. A 2024 data analysis told a different story, measuring average distance from key amenities and crowning New Quay the most isolated town in England and Wales. Homes here sit an average of 6.8 miles from essential services. The nearest major supermarket requires a 20-mile drive to Cardigan. No train station exists closer than 40 minutes away, and there's no bank at all. One resident described a 116-mile round trip to Swansea just for hospital treatment, which captures the reality better than any statistic. Loneliness in New Quay runs on a seasonal clock. Tourists flood the streets in summer, and then winter arrives, and residents say the town turns into a ghost of itself. Dylan Thomas lived here during the 1940s and wrote much of Under Milk Wood in these surroundings, and the town is widely accepted as the model for his fictional village of La Gub. Between 1850 and 1927, over 1,300 merchant master and mate certificates went to New Quay men, evidence of a once thriving maritime economy that produced sailors at an astonishing rate. Young people now leave because wages stay low, property runs expensive, and year-round work barely exists. New Quay's loneliness lives in the gap between what the town once produced and what it can offer now. Life continues here, just without any forward motion. Number 12. Kielder, Northumberland, England. At the head of Northern Europe's largest artificial lake, inside England's largest forest, and deep in the far west of Northumberland, Kielder claims the title of England's most remote village by most accounts. 18 miles separate residents from the nearest cash machine in Bellingham. The closest shopping center in Hexham requires a 53-minute drive, and public transport does not exist here. 194 people occupy roughly 180 houses in what started as a purpose-built forestry commission village in the 1950s. Original plans called for 250 houses, 800 to 1,000 inhabitants, a dozen shops, and 2 pubs, but mechanization gutted the forestry workforce before the village could reach that scale, and the dream died on the drawing board. Kielder Water Reservoir filled in 1982, and the local weather station once recorded -21.7 degrees, which gives you a sense of the winters. 580 square miles of the Northumberland International Dark Sky Park surround the village, representing the lowest light pollution anywhere in England, and over 50% of England's red squirrel population shelters in the surrounding forest. Tourism centered on the reservoir, forest trails, and Kielder Observatory now provides the economic purpose that forestry abandoned. None of that changes the fact that basic services and public transport simply do not reach this place, which means Kielder carries on in a kind of forested silence, hemmed in by dark skies, ancient trees, and very little else. Number 11. Holy Island of Lindisfarne, Northumberland, England. Staying in Northumberland but shifting to the coast brings us to a place where isolation runs on a timetable. Lindisfarne connects to the mainland by a paved causeway that vanishes underwater at high tide, severing the island from the outside world twice every single day. About 180 people call this 3-mile by 1.5-mile island home, and it ranks among the most historically loaded sites in all of Britain. St. Aidan founded a monastery here around 635 AD. The Lindisfarne Gospels took shape around 715 AD as one of medieval art's finest achievements. And the Viking raid of 793 AD that destroyed the monastery is conventionally treated as the opening act of the entire Viking Age. Causeway access lasts for roughly half of each tidal cycle, and about 1 vehicle per month gets stranded by drivers who misjudge the timing. No professional or medical services operate on the island, which forces residents to drive to Berwick-upon-Tweed for groceries and healthcare, and the island shop has already closed. 11 affordable homes built by the Holy Island Community Development Trust represent the latest effort to stop the population from bleeding away entirely. 650,000 visitors arrive each year, and that volume creates a constant friction between the tourism money the island depends on and the strain of actually living in a place where the sea erases your road home twice a day. When the tide rolls in and the causeway disappears, the outside world stops being far away and starts being genuinely unreachable. Number 10. Lundy Island, Devon, England. 12 miles off the North Devon coast, a granite slab of an island sits in the Bristol Channel, 3 miles long and about half a mile wide. Lundy is home to roughly 28 people, and those 28 fill specific roles: warden, ranger, island manager, farmer, bar staff, housekeeping staff, and volunteers who keep everything operational. Jack Hayward bought Lundy for £150,000 in 1969 and handed it to the National Trust, and the Landmark Trust has managed day-to-day operations ever since. Access comes by boat only, with the MS Oldenburg sailing from Bideford and Ilfracombe during the season and a helicopter filling in during winter months, which means every supply the island needs crosses open water first. Lundy prints its own postage stamps called puffins, first issued in 1929, valid for mail within the island, but requiring Royal Mail stamps for anything heading to the mainland. The name itself derives from Old Norse Lundi, meaning puffin, though puffin numbers plummeted to just 5 breeding pairs before conservation work intervened. Waters surrounding Lundy became England's first marine conservation zone in 2017, and over 20,000 visitors now arrive annually. Backing from the National Trust and Landmark Trust gives Lundy a more stable outlook than most entries on this list, but stability doesn't eliminate distance. For the 24 people living here year-round, 12 miles of often rough sea still stand between them and the nearest anything, and that kind of gap shapes every decision they make. Number 9. Durness, Sutherland, Scotland. Scotland's far northwest corner holds the most northwesterly village on the British mainland. Durness spreads across a vast parish running along the north coast of Sutherland, from Loch Arable to Cape Wrath, roughly 120 miles north of Inverness. Population figures vary between 250 and 400 depending on the source, with the 2011 census landing at 347. Summer swells that number to 1,000 when tourists arrive, but before the Highland clearances, the parish counted over 1,100 residents. The Durness riots of 1841 saw 400 armed locals attack sheriff officers resisting the evictions, and during World War II an RAF radar station operated in the area while Loch Arable served as the site where approximately 30 German U-boats surrendered in 1945. Clow Moor, nearby, features the highest sea cliffs on the British mainland at 281 meters, and access to Durness itself comes via single-track roads with passing places and no railway connection closer than 70 miles. Bus routes shrink outside summer season. Until about 50 years ago, the community spoke predominantly Gaelic, and now only 1 or 2 speakers remain, which tracks with how the region earned its description as the most sparsely populated in all of Western Europe. John Lennon spent boyhood summers here and returned in 1969 with Yoko Ono, and a memorial garden in the village honors that connection. Smoo Cave on the village edge ranks as Britain's largest combined sea cave and freshwater cave, with evidence of Mesolithic habitation, while Cape Wrath itself can only be reached by boat across the Kyle of Durness, and then minibus through a Ministry of Defence firing range. Scotland's sparsely populated areas face projections of losing a third of their population by the 2040s, and Durness sits right at the center of that decline. Number 8. Applecross, Wester Ross, Scotland. Until 1822, the only way to reach Applecross was by boat, and the road that finally broke through to this Wester Ross peninsula did nothing to make the journey easy. The Bealach Naba, Scotland's third highest road, climbs from sea level to 630 meters in just 6 kilometers, with gradients pushing 20% and alpine-style hairpin bends that test even experienced drivers. Approximately 230 people live on the peninsula now, which represents a staggering collapse from an estimated 3,000 in 1850. Gaelic dominated the community at 95% of speakers in 1891, dropped to 72% by 1961, and has fallen sharply since. One of Scotland's oldest Christian settlements stands here, founded by the Irish monk Saint Mael Ruba in 672 AD, predated only by Iona, and the Gaelic name translates to the sanctuary because anyone within 6 miles of the church historically enjoyed legal protection from pursuit.
Snow regularly closes the Bealach Naba for weeks in winter, and the road stayed unsurfaced until the 1950s. A second route via Skeldig along the coast wasn't completed until the 1970s, and the peninsula still lacks three-phase electrical power. Petrol required a 36-mile round trip until 2010, when the UK's first unmanned petrol station opened right in Applecross. North Coast 500 tourism traffic now pours over the Bealach Naba in summer, bringing revenue that the peninsula depends on while straining infrastructure built for a fraction of that volume. Applecross offers spectacular scenery and ancient history, but the road that connects it to the rest of Scotland spends much of the year trying to close itself off with weather. Number 7. Rathlin Island, County Antrim, Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland's only inhabited offshore island sits 6 miles off the North Antrim coast, but Rathlin lies just 15.5 nautical miles from Scotland's Mull of Kintyre, which puts it closer to Scotland than to much of Northern Ireland itself. 139 people showed up in the 2021 census, spread across 36 family households and 32 one-person households. That count once exceeded 1,000 in the 19th century before famine, declining fish stocks, and the collapse of kelp production hollowed the community out. Habitation stretches back to the Mesolithic period around 7000 BC, and Rathlin holds the distinction of hosting the first recorded Viking raid on Ireland in 795 AD. Robert the Bruce found shelter here in 1306, and the legendary spider that motivated him to continue fighting for Scottish independence reportedly performed its famous web spinning in a Rathlin cave. Guglielmo Marconi used the island in 1898 to transmit the first commercial wireless signal. Crossings from Ballycastle take 25 to 40 minutes, but rough weather delays and cancels ferries with enough regularity that stranding becomes part of the rhythm of island life. Wind turbines installed in 1992 gave the island its first reliable electricity, and residents now have a primary school, pub, restaurant, post office, and RSPB nature reserve, but no secondary school, no hospital, and no major shops. Houses famously stay unlocked. New social housing is going up, the island has targeted carbon neutrality by 2030, and an RSPB project is actively eradicating invasive rats and ferrets to protect ground-nesting seabirds. Viability still hinges on dependable ferry connections and the ability to draw younger families, and Brexit already dented staffing when EU nationals left the hospitality sector.
Number 6. Bardsey Island, Gwynedd, Wales. 3 people. That is the entire year-round population of Bardsey Island, or Ynys Enlli, sitting 1.9 miles off the tip of the Llyn Peninsula in northwest Wales. Trust staff and wardens account for all of them. Numbers tell the collapse quickly: 132 residents in 1881, 17 by 1961, 4 in 2003, and 3 today. Bardsey carries the title of the Island of 20,000 Saints, named for the monastery founded here in the 6th century, and medieval tradition held that 3 pilgrimages to this island equaled 1 to Rome. Henry VIII dissolved the monastery in 1537, and a tradition of electing a king of Bardsey dates back to at least 1826. Small boats from Porthmodwy handle the 20-minute crossing in calm weather, but conditions turn frequently enough that in the year 2017, visitors found themselves stranded for a full fortnight when storms refused to break. Rental houses on the island operate without electricity, cars are banned, water comes from wells and mountain springs, and toilets sit outdoors. When the Bardsey Island Trust advertised for a farm tenant that same year, 1,100 applications poured in. Dark sky certification arrived in 2023, making Bardsey the first site in Europe to earn international dark sky sanctuary status. A unique Bardsey apple tree on the island is claimed as the oldest in the world, and local legend names the island as King Arthur's burial site. With only 3 permanent residents, Bardsey's claim to being an inhabited island hangs by the thinnest thread imaginable, 1 departure or 1 bad winter away from the category of uninhabited. Number 5. Skerries, Shetland, Scotland. 24 miles northeast of Lerwick in the North Sea, 3 small islands form the most easterly inhabited point in Shetland. Skerries consists of House, Brure, and uninhabited Gwynedd, all connected by about 1 mile of road and a bridge first constructed in 1899 and replaced in 1957. Roughly 35 people live here, and they experience what gets called double insularity.
Reaching Shetland's mainland requires an inter-island ferry taking 90 minutes to 2.5 hours, and from Shetland, the Scottish mainland lies another 12.5 hours away by sea. Weather cancellations hit frequently enough that you learn to plan every trip with a backup timeline. Shipwreck heritage runs deep in these waters. Dutch vessels Kennemerland in 1664 and De Liefde in 1711 both went down near these islands, and the North Wind sank in 1906, carrying a timber cargo that islanders salvaged and used for flooring in every house on Skerries. Scotland's smallest school operates here, covering both primary and secondary levels, and the Schoolhouse Cinema that opened in 2017 ranks as the second smallest cinema in the UK, with free admission and complimentary snacks. Bound Skerry Lighthouse perches on the outermost rock just 164 nautical miles from the nearest Norwegian light, closer to Norway than to most of Scotland. Peat barely exists on these islands, so residents maintain rights to cut fuel on neighboring Walsey, and fresh water only became reliable after engineers installed a unique concrete collection system to solve problems caused by impermeable rock. 35 people, 1 bridge, 1 mile of road, and open sea in every direction. Community here isn't optional, it's a survival strategy. Number 4. Scoraig, Wester Ross, Scotland. Nothing else on this list matches what happened at Scoraig, a remote peninsula between Little Lochbroom and Lochbroom in Wester Ross, roughly a mile across the water from Ullapool, and there is no road connecting it to the outside world. A 5-mile walk from Badralach or a boat ride provide the only access. By 1963, the peninsula stood completely empty. Every original resident had gone. Victorian-era records from 1871 counted over 380 Gaelic-speaking inhabitants, but decades of waiting for a road and electricity connection that never came eventually drove everyone out. And that's when something unexpected happened. That same year, newcomers started trickling in, people looking for a different way of living who were immediately dismissed by newspapers as a hippie commune. They stayed anyway, built homes from scratch, and generated their own electricity using locally designed wind turbines and solar panels. One resident named Hugh Pigott developed small wind turbine designs that earned him international recognition, with his models now replicated across the globe. 70 to 80 people currently call Scoraig home, and a second generation has been born on the peninsula to parents who were themselves born there, which means the community now carries genuine multi-generational roots. A primary school, postal service running 3 times per week, a community boat, and a concrete jetty serve the settlement, but there is no shop, no pub, and no medical facility, and children over 14 face weekly commuting or family relocation to attend Ullapool High School. Scoraig runs completely off the national electricity grid. One resident captured the ethos by saying that if you don't know the difference between a nail and a screw, a place like Scoraig is not for you. This peninsula went from fully abandoned to voluntarily repopulated within a single generation, and that story alone makes it one of the most unusual settlements anywhere in Britain. Number 3. Foula, Shetland, Scotland. 28 kilometers west of the Shetland mainland, totally exposed in the open Atlantic, Foula occupies the space where real geography meets mythology. Early cartographers sometimes identified this island with Foula, the ancient name for the edge of the known world, and the Old Norse name Fugleigh translates to Bird Island. Standing here, both names feel accurate. 17 residents appeared in the 2022 Scottish census, though community sources count 30 to 35 depending on the season. Peak population reached 267 in 1881, but a smallpox epidemic in 1720 that killed 90% of residents broke the trajectory permanently. 5 dramatic peaks define the landscape, with Dagcami's sea cliffs rising 376 meters, ranking second in Britain only behind St. Kilda. A 12-passenger ferry from Walls runs 2 to 3 times a week and takes 2 to 2.5 hours, assuming the Atlantic cooperates, which it frequently does not. No connection to the national electricity grid exists, so a hybrid system of wind turbines, a hydro generator, and solar panels keeps the lights on. No shop operates on the island, no proper harbor shelters the boats, which means vessels must be physically hauled from the water, and medical emergencies trigger evacuation procedures. And here is the detail that catches everyone off guard. Foula still follows the Julian calendar, celebrating Christmas on the 6th of January and New Year on the 13th of January. Norn, an Old Norse language, survived on this island until approximately 1800, making Foula one of the last places in Shetland to speak it. Unmodernized Shetland sheep graze the landscape thanks to a long-standing ban on imports that preserves their unique genetic stock. The world's largest colony of great skuas nests here. Michael Powell filmed The Edge of the World on Foula in 1937, and the RMS Oceanic, a White Star Line vessel and sister ship of the Titanic, went down on the Shalds of Foula in 1914. 17 census residents, no shop, no harbor, no grid. Scoraig chose its isolation. Lindisfarne gets its on a schedule, but Foula just endures the raw, constant weight of living on a rock in the open Atlantic 28 kilometers from anything. Number 2. Fair Isle, Shetland, Scotland. Sitting in the gap where the North Sea collides with the Atlantic, 39 kilometers south of Shetland and 43 northeast of Orkney, Fair Isle holds the title of the most remote inhabited island in the United Kingdom. 3 miles by 1.5 miles of wind-blasted land, and as of the 2022 census, 44 people call it home. 44 represents a new modern low. Population stood at 380 in 1861, but a mass emigration the following year sent 134 people to Nova Scotia, and by the 1950s, roughly 50 remained, while officials quietly discussed evacuation. 6,000 years of continuous habitation include a Spanish Armada shipwreck in 1588 when El Gran Grifon hit the west coast, 2 Stevenson lighthouses erected in 1891, and Royal Navy radar installations on Ward Hill that detected German bombers heading for Scapa Flow during World War II. The ferry Good Shepherd IV crosses from near Sumburg twice weekly, taking 2.5 hours each way, and flights operate on an 8-seat plane from Tingwall when weather permits. Reaching Shetland itself first means a 12.5-hour ferry from the Scottish mainland, which is double insularity pushed to the extreme. A single shop keeps irregular hours. 1 primary school teaches approximately 3 pupils. Secondary children must board on Shetland, and medical coverage comes down to a single nurse with air or sea evacuation as the only option for emergencies. Distinctive Fair Isle knitwear patterns still come from traditional knitters on the island. The South Lighthouse stood as the last manned lighthouse in the UK, and during COVID-19 Fair Isle became the first place in Britain to vaccinate every eligible adult, which they accomplished in a single morning. An endemic subspecies called the Fair Isle wren lives nowhere else in Europe, and over 350 bird species have been recorded. The Fair Isle Bird Observatory burned in a devastating 2019 fire, and its £10 million replacement reopened in May 2025 with 29 rooms, effectively doubling the island's population during birding season. A new £5.6 million ferry is expected by October 2026. Those investments amount to enormous bets on whether 44 people can anchor a community in one of the most exposed locations in Britain. Every departure registers, every arrival counts, and every supply run and every medical emergency requires crossing waters that rank among the most dangerous in the country. Number 1. Inverie, Knoydart, Scotland. Number 1 on this list sits, paradoxically, on the British mainland. Inverie occupies the Knoydart Peninsula in the western Scottish Highlands, officially the most remote settlement on the mainland of the United Kingdom, verified by a Guinness World Record for remoteness, and it carries the most extraordinary community story in all of Britain. 55,000 acres of wilderness stretch between Loch Nevis, which translates to the Loch of Heaven, and Loch Aurn, the Loch of Hell. 3 Munros, mountains exceeding 3,000 feet, block the peninsula from the nearest road. Fort William sits roughly 40 miles distant, and reaching Glasgow requires a 14-hour journey. 7 miles of tarred road exist within Knoydart, but none connect to the national road network, leaving an 18-mile mountain hike or a 7-mile ferry from Mallaig as the only ways in. Between 120 and 140 people currently live across the peninsula, more than half concentrated in Inverie, and that figure actually represents a near doubling since 1999, when the population had dropped to around 60. Before the Highland clearances, roughly 1,000 people lived here. What happened to those people tells one of Scotland's darkest stories. On the 9th of August 1853, 330 men, women, and children were forced aboard the ship Sillery bound for Canada in one of the most notorious episodes of the clearances, and 11 families who refused to board were violently evicted. Nearly a century later in 1948, 7 men launched a land raid to reclaim Crofts and lost their case in court. The Special Operations Executive ran covert training schools on the peninsula during World War II. Everything changed in 1999 when the Knoydart Foundation, a partnership bringing together residents, Highland Council, the Chris Brasher Trust, and the John Muir Trust, purchased 17,500 acres in a landmark community buyout. No connection to the national electricity grid exists, so the community built its own 280 kilowatt hydroelectric microgrid. No mobile phone masts stand on the peninsula, and no street lighting illuminates the roads, but a primary school, post office, well-stocked community shop, pottery, tea room, brewery housed in a converted chapel, and bunkhouse all operate. And then there's the Old Forge, confirmed by Guinness as mainland Britain's most remote pub, which became the beating heart of the community's identity. When it went up for sale, residents organized a community benefit society that raised over £200,000 locally, topped off by a £508,000 Scottish Land Fund grant. Around 75% of residents now own shares in their pub, and renovation wrapped up in August 2023. Inverie earns the top spot not because it's falling apart, not because people abandoned it, and not because it's a relic clinging to existence. Every person living here made a conscious decision to settle in a place with no road, no grid, no mobile signal, and no quick exit. They built their own power supply, bought their own land, and purchased their own pub. Knoydart, Nova Scotia, carries its name because of the families forced onto ships in 1853, and 170 years later the community those families were ripped from has rebuilt itself with a growing population, diversifying economy, and international awards for resilience. Inverie answers the question that runs through this entire list. When a community gets cut off from everything, what happens next? In most cases, the answer is slow decline. In Knoydart, they fought back. Those are the 15 loneliest inhabited places in the United Kingdom, running from England's highest village to islands scattered across the open Atlantic, from communities severed by tides twice a day to peninsulas where no road has ever been built. Some of these places are fading, some are actively fighting back, and a handful are genuinely growing. One question connects every single entry on this list, and it's the same question every resident faces: whether the beauty, the silence, and the independence are worth the distance from everything else. People who stay have already decided yes, and the ones who leave don't owe anyone an explanation. If you had to pick one of these 15 places to live in, which one could you handle? Drop that in the comments. Hit like if anything here caught you off guard, and subscribe for more stories from the edges of the map, because the quietest places tend to carry the loudest stories.